If you press the like button and subscribe to Lynn and Vengeance before you hear how this ends, I think you already know what kind of story this is. The kind where a father stands in a hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning, staring at his phone, reading a text from his own daughter that says, and I am going to quote this exactly because I have read it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. Dad, we need you to transfer the house into Ryan's name before the end of the month, or we're going to have a problem. Not a please, not an explanation, a deadline from my daughter about the house I bought, that I still owned. I want you to hold on to that image for a second. A 63-year-old man standing in the cold outside a hospital in Mississauga, Ontario, having just spent 4 hours sitting with my wife while she recovered from a procedure, reading a text from our only child that read like a legal threat. I did not respond that night. I put my phone in my coat pocket, and I drove home in the dark, and I sat at the kitchen table until almost 4 in the morning because I knew, somewhere deep in the part of me that I had been ignoring for years, that this was not the beginning of the problem. This was just the first time my daughter had forgotten to hide it. I spent 38 years working in civil engineering. I started as a site technician out of Mohawk College, and I worked my way up, slowly, the way you actually do when nobody hands you anything. My wife taught elementary school for 31 years. We were not wealthy in the way people imagine when they hear stories like this. We were comfortable because we worked, because we saved, because we did not spend money we did not have. We paid off our house in Oakville in 2009. We drove the same vehicles for 10 years at a stretch. We took one real vacation every 2 years, and we chose it based on what we had saved, not on what we wished we had. Our daughter grew up watching that. Or I thought she did. She was bright. She really was. She got into McMaster for business administration, and she graduated with decent marks, and she moved to Toronto, and she got a job in marketing, and for a few years, things looked fine. She called on Sundays. She came home for holidays. She brought Ryan to meet us the second year they were together, and he seemed, at the time, like a solid young man. He had a job in IT project management. He was polite at the dinner table. He laughed at my jokes, which honestly goes a long way. They got engaged in the fall of 2019. The wedding was planned for the following summer, and then the pandemic happened, and everything was pushed back. And when they finally got married in the summer of 2021, I paid for the wedding. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. I paid for it, not because they asked, not because I was pressured. I offered because that is what I believed a father did. The venue was a property outside of Hamilton. The catering, the photographer, the florist, the open bar, $82,000. My wife and I agreed on it. We had the savings. We wanted to give them a proper start. What I did not understand at the time was that a proper start for my daughter and her husband meant something completely different than it meant to me. 3 months after the wedding, they came to us with what they called an opportunity. A townhouse in Burlington had come onto the market. A good price, they said, for the area. They had looked at their finances, and with their down payment and their combined income, they could qualify for the mortgage. But they were about $45,000 short on the down payment to avoid the higher mortgage insurance rates. Could we help? Not lend. Help. My daughter actually said that. She said, "We're not asking you to lend us anything, Dad. We're just asking you to help us get started." I have thought about those words many times since then. We gave them the $45,000. My wife was a little more hesitant than I was, and I remember the conversation we had the night before we transferred the money. She said to me, "Once we do this, it becomes theirs. You know that, right? You can't take it back." I told her I knew that. I told her that was the point. The townhouse closed in early 2022. They moved in. We helped them with a few things in the first months. A new washer and dryer. Some furniture they needed. Small things, I told myself. $2,000 here. $1,500 there. My wife stopped commenting on it after a while, which I now understand meant she had made peace with something I had not yet seen clearly. The requests became more regular through 2022 and into 2023. There was always a reason. The car needed repairs, a dental bill that their insurance only partially covered. Ryan had been passed over for a promotion and things were tighter than expected. My daughter called with a tone I can only describe as practiced, calm, slightly apologetic, but not too much, just enough. I transferred money each time, never a huge amount on its own, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. I kept a rough mental accounting, and I told myself it balanced out to something reasonable. I was wrong about that. In the spring of 2023, Ryan was laid off. His company had done a round of cuts, and he was among them. He was not panicked when they told us, which I remember thinking was admirable at the time. He said he had some leads. He said the market was good for people with his experience. He said he expected to be back working within 2 or 3 months. He was not back working in 2 or 3 months. My daughter called me in August of that year, and she told me that Ryan had decided to pursue some consulting work on his own, that he was building something, that it was going to take some time to get off the ground. She asked if we could help cover their mortgage payments while he got established. She was very clear that it was temporary. She mentioned a specific number of months, 4, maybe 5. She said they had a plan. I said yes. I am going to be honest with you about something. I said yes partly because I loved my daughter and I wanted to help her, and partly because it was easier to say yes than to have the conversation that saying no would have opened up. I was 62 years old. My wife had been dealing with some health concerns. I did not have the energy for conflict with my own child. I told myself I was being a good father. Their mortgage payments in Burlington at that point were just over $2,200 a month. We covered October, November, December. The new year came, and Ryan still did not have steady income. My daughter started talking about the consulting work in vaguer terms. She stopped mentioning timelines. My wife asked me once, in January of 2024, how much we had given them altogether since the wedding. I told her I was not sure of the exact number. She looked at me for a long moment and she did not say anything else. I went to my home office that evening and I sat down and I actually tried to add it up. The wedding, the down payment, the small transfers over 2022, the furniture, the mortgage payments. I had to go back through my banking app and my transfer records, and I spent about an hour doing that. And when I had a rough total in front of me, I sat very still for a while. It was somewhere around $240,000 over roughly 3 years. I want you to understand that number in context. My wife and I were both retired by this point. We had our pensions, hers from the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, mine from my firm's defined benefit plan. We were not in financial danger. But $240,000 is $240,000, and I had watched it leave our accounts in pieces small enough that I had never quite looked at the whole thing at once. I closed my laptop and I went to bed, and I did not tell my wife the number that night. In February of 2024, my daughter called to tell me about a trip. She and Ryan and 2 other couples, friends of theirs from Toronto, were planning a spring vacation. Cabo San Lucas, 10 days. She mentioned it casually. The way you mention something you assume is not going to be a problem. She said they were all splitting costs, and it was a good deal and she was really looking forward to it. I asked her carefully how they were paying for their portion. There was a pause. She told me they had put it on credit. I asked her which credit. She said, "Dad, don't make this a thing. It's 10 days. Ryan has some work coming in. We'll handle it." I said okay. I did not push further. But something had shifted in me during that pause, something I could not quite name yet, but that I recognized as the feeling of a piece of information that you are not being given. They went to Cabo in April. I saw the photos on social media, a resort with a pool overlooking the ocean, a sunset dinner somewhere with linen tablecloths, Ryan holding a drink, grinning, my daughter in a sundress, laughing at something out of frame. They looked like people without a single concern. 10 days after they got back, my daughter called asking for another mortgage payment. That was the week I decided to actually look at things. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. I started going back through records. Not just my own transfers, but conversations, timelines, things that had been said in passing over the past 2 years. I pulled out a small notebook, the kind I used to carry on job sites, and I started writing things down. Dates, amounts, things my daughter had told me about Ryan's work, timelines that had been mentioned and then quietly dropped. Ryan had told me in the fall of 2023 that he had a consulting contract with a company in Brampton. He mentioned it twice. When I gently followed up in December, my daughter had changed the subject. I had not pressed it. Now I wrote it down. My daughter had mentioned the previous summer that they were thinking about refinancing the townhouse now that property values had risen. She said it casually. I wrote that down too. I called a friend of mine who had worked in financial services for 30 years. I told him I had a situation I needed to think through clearly, and I asked if I could take him to lunch. We met at a place in downtown Oakville, and I laid out what I had, and he listened. And when I was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Have you checked whether there's a line of credit registered against the property?" I had not thought of that. My friend explained how to request a property title search in Ontario. It was not complicated. Within a week, I had the results in front of me. There was a home equity line of credit registered against the townhouse in Burlington. It had been opened in the spring of 2023, shortly after Ryan was laid off. The limit was $90,000. I need you to understand what that meant. The townhouse had been bought with $45,000 of my money as part of the down payment. The value had gone up, and my daughter and son-in-law had, without saying a word to me, used that increased equity to open a $90,000 line of credit. And they had asked me to continue covering their mortgage payments at the same time. I put the document down on my kitchen table, and I looked at it for a very long time. I did not call my daughter that day. I did not call her the next day either. I called a lawyer instead, a woman I was referred to through my own solicitor, who specialized in family financial disputes and estate planning. I told her everything, all of it, the wedding, the down payment, the transfers, the mortgage payments, the line of credit. She listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she said, "The question is, what you want the outcome to be." I told her I needed to think about that. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I spoke to my wife. That was the hardest conversation. She sat at the kitchen table while I showed her the numbers, all of them together, and she did not cry. She just looked at the paper, and then she looked at me, and she said, "I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was this bad." I asked her what she wanted me to do. She said, "Whatever you decide, I'm behind you. But I'm done watching us disappear into their account." I called the lawyer back and I told her what I wanted. The first step was a formal letter from my solicitor to my daughter and Ryan, requesting a full accounting of how the funds transferred to them since 2021 had been used, and notifying them that the mortgage assistance payments would be ending immediately. The letter was professional. It was not hostile. It simply stated facts and asked for documentation. My daughter called me 11 minutes after the letter arrived. I know the timing because I was watching the clock. She was not calm this time. She told me the letter had blindsided her, that she could not believe I had gone to a lawyer without talking to her first, that this was not how family handled things. I waited until she had finished, and then I said, "I have been handling things for 3 years. I would like to understand where $240,000 went." She told me I was being dramatic. She told me the number was not accurate. She told me Ryan had work coming in and they were going to be fine. I said, "I'd like that in writing." She hung up. Ryan texted me 2 hours later. His text was longer, and it was written in a tone I can only describe as professionally wounded. He talked about how hard he'd been working, about the uncertainty of building something new, about how my actions were damaging their stability at a critical moment. He did not mention the line of credit. He did not address the letter. He asked me to call off the lawyers and give them time. I did not respond. What happened over the next 60 days I will summarize because some of it is still in legal process and I have been advised to be careful about specifics. What I can tell you is this. The accounting my lawyer requested revealed that the home equity line of credit had been substantially drawn down. A portion of it had gone to fund Ryan's supposed consulting business, which had no registered clients and no recorded revenue. A portion had gone to expenses that I can only describe as personal and discretionary. The Cabo trip was on there. So were several other things that I will not catalog in detail, because cataloging them would only make me tired. My lawyer advised me that while the down payment gift was not recoverable under Ontario law because it had been given without conditions, there were other matters worth examining around the representations that had been made to me over an extended period. I'm not going to say more than that. What I will tell you is what happened to the townhouse. My daughter and Ryan had been relying entirely on my mortgage payments to cover the property since the fall of 2023. When I stopped the payments, they were unable to cover the mortgage on their own. By the end of the summer, they were behind. By September, they had listed the townhouse. It sold in October, in a market that had softened from its peak, for less than they owed between the mortgage balance and the line of credit. They walked away with nothing. They are currently renting. My daughter called me in November. She did not mention the money. She did not mention the letter. She said she missed me. She said things had been hard. She asked if we could have dinner sometime, maybe at Christmas. I told her I needed more time. It is January now. My wife and I spent Christmas quietly. We drove up to a small place we rented near Huntsville, on a lake, and we lit a fire, and we cooked a real meal, and we sat and watched the snow come down in the dark through the back window. It was the most peaceful Christmas I've had in several years, which is a strange thing to say, and also the truest thing I can say. I have not transferred $1 to anyone since August. I am 63 years old. I worked my whole life for what I have. I gave a piece of it, a very significant piece of it, to someone who called me Dad, and I did it because I thought that was what love looked like. I know now that love can look like that and also be used by the wrong people in the wrong way, and you can give from a full heart and still end up having given too much to someone who was counting on you not to count. I am not a wealthy man who engineered some masterful revenge. I am a retired engineer from Oakville who finally looked at a spreadsheet I had been avoiding for 3 years and decided that the rest of whatever time I have is worth protecting. My wife agrees. The lake at Huntsville was frozen solid by Boxing Day. We walked out on it in the morning with our coffee and stood there in the cold and looked at the tree line, and neither of us said anything for a long time. There was nothing that needed to be said. There was just the ice and the quiet and the particular peace of having finally stopped pretending that everything was fine.